In the heart of a small town where time seemed to flow more slowly, Silent Street had always been a refuge for those seeking tranquility. The houses, with their weathered facades, witnesses to decades of stories, seemed to harbor only the monotonous and peaceful routine of their residents. But beneath the calm surface, this street hid a dark secret that had remained buried for 30 years, until now. On Friday night, the usual silence was broken by a muffled scream, a sound that echoed between the walls of the sleeping houses. When the first neighbors arrived at the scene, they found Clara's body, a young woman who had recently moved to the street, lying on the curb. Her open eyes reflected the horror of her final moments, and on her skin, marks that no one on that street wanted to remember. Exactly 30 years ago, another woman, Marta, was found dead on the same street under eerily similar circumstances. At the time, the case caused an uproar in the small community, but the investigation soon hit dead ends. The killer was never found. Over time, fear gave way to forgetfulness, until that night, when the past returned to claim its place. Detective Raul, now retired, was the young officer in charge of the case 30 years ago. The memories of failure still weighed heavily on him, and the discovery of the new body reopened old wounds. He knew something was very wrong, that this recent murder was more than mere coincidence. Against his own will, he finds himself drawn back into the heart of the investigation, determined to finally solve the riddle that has haunted him for so long. As Raul begins to dive into the old case files, he realizes that the residents of Silent Street are not as innocent as they seem. Small details, hushed conversations, and furtive glances start to paint a dark picture. He discovers that Clara had moved into the house that once belonged to Marta. Was that a coincidence? Or was it the reason behind her death? And why were the marks on both women's bodies so similar? The secrets of Silent Street begin to emerge, revealing a web of intrigue that connects the residents in unexpected ways. Old grudges, forbidden loves, and buried sins start to come to light as Raul delves deeper into the history of the place. Each discovery brings him closer to the truth, but also puts him in greater danger. The killer, or whoever is behind these crimes, does not want the secret to be revealed. What Raul doesn't know is that as he digs deeper, someone is watching him from the shadows, determined to stop him from solving the case. Every step he takes towards the truth might be his last, as the tension on Silent Street mounts, and the residents begin to fear that the past will resurface in ways no one expected. The next night, another scream pierces the silence. This time, the sound is even more disturbing because Raul knows that the next target might be closer than he imagines. The residents start to shut themselves inside their homes, but the danger is among them, closer than they would like to admit. With each passing day, the feeling that something is about to explode becomes more palpable. Time is running out, and Raul knows he must find the connection between the two murders before it's too late. The morning after the second scream, Detective Raul woke up with a sense of unease. He knew he was close to uncovering something important, but he also felt that each step forward was leading him deeper into an abyss of secrets and lies. The street, once welcoming, now had an air of oppression. The residents, once friendly, now avoided contact as if each one carried the weight of something unspeakable. Raul revisited the spot where Clara was found. Something about the scene troubled him. He crouched down, examining the ground around him, and then he noticed it. There was a mark on the asphalt, as if someone had dragged something heavy. The body? Or perhaps something else? He followed the trail that led him to the entrance of a narrow alley, a place that had gone unnoticed until then. At the end of the alley, a small wooden door, almost hidden by the shadow, seemed to lead to a place no one wanted to remember. Upon opening the door, Raoul found an old cellar. The damp walls and the smell of mold indicated that the place hadn't been visited in years. But what caught his attention was what was in the center of the cellar, an old wooden chest marked by time and wear. He hesitated for a moment before opening the lid. Inside, he found old documents, black and white photos, letters stained by time, and something even more disturbing, a series of newspaper clippings all about Marta's murder 30 years ago. The photos showed Marta in moments of relaxation, always with the same familiar faces in the background, the residents of Silent Street. They were all connected to her in some way. The letters, written in a nervous handwriting, spoke of forbidden loves, betrayals, and a promise of revenge that would never be forgotten. But what really caught Raoul's attention was one last letter, more recent, written in a threatening tone and addressed to Clara. "You are where you shouldn't be. Leave before it's too late." Raoul knew he could no longer wait. He had to confront the residents of the street and uncover who was behind the murders. But as he reflected on this, he heard footsteps approaching. Someone was descending the basement stairs. He turned off the flashlight and hid behind a pillar, breathing as quietly as possible. The door creaked open, and a hooded figure entered, holding something that glimmered under the faint light, a knife. The detective braced himself for what was to come, but the stranger headed straight for the chest. The sound of the knife slicing through the air was followed by the noise of wood being struck, as if the intruder was determined to destroy any evidence. Raoul knew this was his chance. In a swift move, he leaped onto the figure, disarming them with a precise blow. The knife clattered to the ground with a loud thud, and the hooded figure struggled to escape, but Raoul managed to pin them down. "Who are you?" Raoul asked, panting. With a sharp tug, he pulled the hood off the figure. The face that appeared was unexpected. One of the oldest residents of the street, Mr. Alfredo, a man Raoul would never have imagined involved in something so dark. "What were you trying to hide?" Raoul demanded, holding Alfredo's arms firmly. But Alfredo only laughed, a dry, bitter sound. "You don't understand anything, Raoul. You're digging up a grave that should have stayed buried. There are things better left in the past." Raoul, however, knew he was on the right path. He needed to discover what Alfredo knew, and more than that, he needed to understand the true connection between Marta and Clara, and why both were murdered in such a similar manner. Silent Street, which had kept its secrets for so long, was beginning to crumble under the weight of hidden truths. And Raoul, now more determined than ever, knew he was only at the beginning of a mystery far deeper than he could have imagined. The night was not over yet, and as the first rays of sunlight appeared on the horizon, Raoul prepared himself for the final battle. But one question kept echoing in his mind. What else was hidden in those letters and documents? And who else, besides Alfredo, was involved in that web of death and silence? With Alfredo bound in his hands, Raoul knew he had to act quickly. He handcuffed the man to an old pipe in the basement, ensuring he wouldn't escape while Raoul explored what else that place was hiding. Alfredo, now silent, merely watched him with a look filled with resentment, as if Raoul was desecrating something sacred by delving deeper into that investigation. The detective turned his attention back to the documents scattered around. There was something macabre about that collection of secrets. The black and white photos told an unspoken story, where apparent smiles hid underlying tensions. Marta seemed to be at the center of it all, always beside familiar figures from the street, but in each image there was something out of place, a subtle disconnect that Raoul couldn't fully identify. Among the letters, one caught his attention. It wasn't yellowed like the others, indicating it was recent. The paper was expensive, the handwriting meticulous, as if every word had been chosen with surgical precision. Raoul, you shouldn't be here. Your presence disturbs the balance, resurrects ghosts that should have stayed buried. Stop now, while you still can. Some truths are not meant to be revealed, and the price for knowing them is too high for anyone to bear. The one who watches. Raoul felt a chill run down his spine. The letter was addressed to him, which meant someone had been following his steps, knowing exactly what he was doing. But who? And why? And, more importantly, who was the one who watches? As he pondered this, he heard a faint groan coming from the darkest corner of the basement. With the flashlight, he illuminated the spot, revealing something that made him recoil. There, half hidden by old rags and dusty boxes, was a body. But it wasn't just any body. It was a skeleton, with remnants of clothes still clinging to the bones. Raoul slowly approached, observing what appeared to be a woman, one who had likely been dead for decades. His heart began to race. Could this be Marta's body, missing for so long? But if Marta had been found dead on the street 30 years ago, then who was this woman? The answer seemed to be trapped in the bones of that forgotten figure, and Raoul knew he didn't have much time before the situation became even more dangerous. Suddenly, a metallic sound echoed through the basement. Alfredo had managed to free one of the handcuffs and was now desperately trying to escape. Raoul rushed to stop him, but Alfredo was more agile than he appeared. He grabbed an old piece of wood and attacked Raoul with the strength of someone desperate, his eyes filled with a fury contained for decades. The two fought fiercely, knocking over shelves and scattering remnants of the past across the floor. Raoul finally managed to overpower Alfredo, but not before the man uttered one last sentence, loaded with hatred and despair. You don't understand. None of this is what it seems. There are things you shouldn't know. But before Raoul could press him for more information, he heard a sound above his head, light, almost imperceptible footsteps descending the basement stairs. Someone else was there, someone who knew exactly what was happening. With Alfredo subdued, Raoul turned to face the new intruder, his heart pounding like a drum in his ears. The basement door slowly opened, revealing a slender silhouette, almost feminine, but the face was obscured by shadows. "You've dug too deep, Raoul," the figure said in a soft voice, yet laden with a veiled threat. "Now, you'll have to deal with the consequences." Before Raoul could react, the figure threw something in his direction, a glass vial that shattered upon hitting the ground, releasing a dense, suffocating smoke. The detective tried to cover his face, but the substance was already affecting him. His strength was quickly fading, and everything around him began to spin. The last thing Raoul saw before losing consciousness was the figure slowly approaching, the voice whispering in his ear, as if sealing his fate. "Welcome to the true mystery of Silent Street." Raoul awoke with a throbbing pain in his head and the sense that something had gone terribly wrong. He tried to move, but his body felt heavy, and his legs wouldn't respond. The cold, damp floor indicated he was still in the basement, but the environment around him was completely different. The shadows seemed thicker, as if the very space had contracted, trapping him in a distorted reality. The air was thick with a pungent smell, mixed with the basement's mold, making each breath an effort. He looked around, his eyes struggling to focus in the darkness. The chest that once held the secrets of the past was now broken in half, the documents scattered like dead leaves across the floor. But something was terribly wrong. Alfredo was no longer there. No signs of a struggle, no footprints, nothing to indicate he had moved on his own. It was as if he had simply vanished into thin air. Raoul tried to stand, but his muscles were weak, and he fell back to the floor with a groan of pain. That's when he realized he wasn't alone. From somewhere in the shadows, a presence watched. There was no sound, just the undeniable feeling that he was being observed, studied. His detective instincts warned him of the danger, but he was vulnerable, at the mercy of the unknown. "Who's there?" His voice came out hoarse, almost inaudible, but the echo that reverberated off the basement walls seemed to mock his frailty. No response. Only the crushing silence of Silent Street. Trying to focus, he noticed something new on the floor beside him, a small photograph. Trembling, Raoul picked it up and, by the faint light emanating from an old lamp in the corner, saw what it depicted. It was an old black-and-white image of Marta and Alfredo, but in the background, something almost imperceptible caught his attention. A shadowy figure, standing far away, watched the two. A figure that, unlike the others, didn't seem to be made of flesh and bone. Raoul felt a chill run down his spine. The same figure he saw in the photo, the one watching from afar, now seemed to be right there, in the shadows of the basement. His eyes, fixed on the darkness, tried to distinguish what was real and what was the product of his confused mind, but fear began to creep into his thoughts. With a desperate effort, Raoul managed to get up, stumbling towards the stairs. Each step felt like an eternity, and the sensation of being followed intensified. When he finally reached the top, he turned the doorknob, but the door was locked. He pounded on the wood with force, trying to break free, but something or someone on the other side held it firmly shut. Then he heard that voice again, the same one that had threatened him before he lost consciousness. This time, it came from all directions, as if the walls were whispering in unison. "You shouldn't have come here, Raoul. Some mysteries should never be solved." With a sharp crack, the door finally gave way, and Raoul stumbled out of the basement, falling onto the deserted street. He breathed deeply, feeling the fresh air fill his lungs, but the relief was short-lived. Looking around, Silent Street seemed different, as if a veil of normalcy had been torn away, revealing its true nature. The houses now had an air of abandonment, and the windows, once so familiar, seemed like empty eyes watching him with disturbing indifference. As Raoul tried to regain his composure, he felt something inside him had changed. He had entered the heart of a mystery that should never have been unearthed, and now the street itself seemed to want to get rid of him, like a living entity jealously guarding its secrets. Suddenly, a faint light flickered on in the oldest house on the street, the same one where Marta and Clara had lived. Raoul knew the story wasn't completely over, that there were more layers to this mystery than he could comprehend. But at the same time, something inside him warned him to leave it all behind, to never return to that street. As he walked away, silence once again dominated the street, as thick as before. But to Raoul, it would never be the same, because now he knew. He knew that some mysteries, like that of Silent Street, had no end. They only began anew, waiting for another victim to be drawn into their inescapable web. And somewhere, deep in the basement, that figure continued to watch, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul who dared to challenge the secrets that should forever remain buried.